before the missiles, before the borders, before the nations even had names.
God,
there was a promise made in the desert and two peoples who would spend eternity fighting over what it meant.
Promise and reshape the world.
This is not a story about politics, not about oil or nuclear deals. This is a story about God, a piece of land, and a conflict so ancient,
and it will remain ours,
that its roots are buried deeper than any army's boots could ever dig. The land we call Israel today sits at the crossroads of 3 continents. A strip of earth so small you could drive across it in 2 hours. Yet it has been conquered, lost, wept over, and bled for more than any place in human history. And Iran, the nation the world once called Persia, was not always Israel's enemy. There was a time, recorded in the pages of the Bible itself, when a Persian king was called the Anointed One of God, chosen by name. Centuries before his birth, to set God's people free, his name was Cyrus the Great. And what happened between that moment of divine appointment and today's headlines of drone strikes is one of the most staggering reversals in the history of civilization. We are going to walk through all of it, from the covenant in Genesis, to the exile in Babylon, to the decree of Cyrus, through the Crusades, the Ottoman collapse, the birth of modern Israel, the Islamic Revolution, and straight into the tension that defines our world right now. And here is what I need you to understand before we begin.
To dust. Look deep and see what has always been.
Every single headline you have ever read about the Middle East has a backstory that goes back thousands of years, and most people have never been told that story in full until today. If you have ever wanted to truly understand why this land matters and why these two peoples cannot stop, then stay with me.
Welcome, wanderer,
this channel exists for one reason: to take you into the stories that shaped eternity, to help you see the hand of God moving through history in ways that will leave you breathless. Let's begin. In the ancient world, land was not just territory, there was identity, destiny, and divine inheritance. And there is one piece of land, small, dusty, sitting between the desert and the sea, that God looked at and said, "This one is mine." But before we talk about the land, we have to talk about the man. His name was Abram, not a king, not a warrior. He was a wanderer from a city called Ur, in what is now modern-day Iraq. With no children, no kingdom, and no future that anyone could see. But God saw something no one else did. One day, without warning, without ceremony, God spoke to Abram and made him a promise.
Yes.
So extraordinary that it would reshape the entire map of human history. Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. No GPS, no map, no coordinates, just a voice, a direction, and a promise. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great.
My shield.
And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Genesis 12, one of the most consequential paragraphs ever written. Abram traveled southwest through desert and valley until he reached the land of Canaan. a region between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, already full of people and history. And when he arrived, God appeared
land
again
of
and
milk and
said,
honey.
"To your offspring I will give
It
this
is more
land."
beautiful than I could have imagined.
Those 7 words have
I will
echoed
give you
through
the land of
4,000
Canaan
years of war.
as an everlasting possession.
Now here is something most people overlook. Canaan was not empty. There were already people living there. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites established civilizations with cities, armies, and gods of their own. And yet
This
God pointed
is the
to this land occupied,
From this
contested,
place,
already
the
full of
story will
history, and
begin.
said,
Why
"This is
here?
where my story will unfold."
makes this ground
Why
so
this
sacred?
land? Theologians have
The weight
asked
of
for
centuries
centuries.
rests on this earth.
Geographically, Canaan was the crossroads of the ancient world. Every major trade route between Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Arabia passed directly through this narrow strip of land. Whoever controlled Canaan controlled the flow of civilization itself. God did not choose an isolated corner of the world. God chose the center. Abram, whose name God later changed to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, would wait 25 years before his promised son was born. But in that waiting, something else happened. Abraham and his wife Sarah, impatient with God's timeline, made a decision that would echo through history.
You ask this of
Sarah
me?
had an Egyptian servant named
will break
Hagar,
us.
and she said, "Take
But
her
it
as a
must be
wife."
done.
Abraham
fate.
listened. Hagar conceived and bore a son. His name was Ishmael, and God also made a promise over him.
God,
"I will make him
I
into a
have
great
walked with
nation."
you.
But the
But how
covenant
can my
would pass
two
through
sons be so
Isaac, the
far
son
apart?
Sarah would bear. Ishmael's descendants would become the Arab peoples. Isaac's descendants would become the people of Israel. 2 sons, 1 father, 2 promises, and 1 land standing between them. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because what we are watching in the headlines today did not begin in 1948. It did not begin in 1917. It began in a tent
the time has come.
4,000 years ago,
promise
when a
must be
man tried to
fulfilled.
help God keep his
I only
promise
pray our efforts are enough.
and accidentally set in motion a rivalry that has never stopped. This is not a political conflict. This is a family story, the oldest,
I never
most
intended
painful,
for this to
most
happen.
complicated family story ever told. And the land,
For
that narrow
generations
strip
we have
between
stood
the
here.
river and the sea, is the
This thin
inheritance.
strip of land, our promise from the Father. It is
Both sides believed they were promised by the same God, through the same Father. By the time Abraham died, he had seen enough to know the story was far bigger than one lifetime. He died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. He knew the story was just beginning, and he was right. The land was chosen, the people were chosen, and the story, no matter how many times it seemed to end, was never truly over. What came next would take 400 years and the blood of a generation. 400 years.
Keep moving.
That is
Push
how
those
long the
blocks.
descendants of Abraham lived as slaves in Egypt,
Move it. Help me, Lord.
building
Help me bear
cities
this
for a
burden.
pharaoh
Get back
who
to
did
work,
not
slave.
know their
Move
God and
faster.
did not care
Just
about their
further.
promise.
Asandar, I can do this.
400 years of brick and mortar, of whips and chains, of prayers rising from a people who must have wondered whether the God of Abraham had forgotten them entirely. He had not. He raised up a man named Moses, parted the Red Sea, led his people through the wilderness, and brought them into the land he had promised their father. What followed was centuries of kings and prophets,
The kingdom is
glory and
established.
collapse.
The
David
city
built an
stands
empire. Solomon built the temple.
promise is fulfilled.
And then, slowly, the cracks appeared. The people turned away, not all at once, but gradually. The way a river changes course over generations, so slowly you almost don't notice until the landscape is unrecognizable. And the God who had promised blessing now sent warning after warning through his prophets.
Before it is too late.
Turn back.
Turn back. Return. Or the land will swallow you whole. They did not listen.
God, why have you
In
forsaken us?
722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by Assyria. 10 tribes scattered, gone. Then came Babylon. In 586 BC, the Babylonian king marched his armies into Jerusalem, tore down the walls, burned the temple to the ground, and dragged the people of Judah in chains across the desert to Babylon, the very land their ancestor Abraham had left behind. The circle of exile was complete, and there, in the rivers of Babylon, the people sat down and wept. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? They hung their harps on the willow trees and could not sing. It looked, to every human eye, like the story of Israel was over. But here is where the story takes a turn. 150 years before it happened, before Babylon had even risen to power,
Yet a shadow the time draws near for the deliverer.
before the temple had been destroyed, before a
first,
single exile had set
shadow
foot in a
descends.
foreign land. A prophet named Isaiah wrote down a name, not a title, not a description, a specific,
Isaiah
personal
45
name.
verses
This
1.
is what the Lord says
name
to
of
his
a king who
anointed,
will not
to
be born
Cyrus,
for another
whose right hand I
150
take hold
years.
of. Isaiah 45:1. Written in approximately 700 BC, Cyrus the Great was born around 600 BC. God called a man by name a century and a half before that man was born.
You call me the God of Israel.
And that is not
I
even the
accept
most
this
extraordinary part.
I am
The
your
title
shepherd.
God gave him, Anointed
I am your
One,
Messiah.
is the same Hebrew word used for the Messiah. God gave a pagan Persian king the same designation reserved for his most chosen servants. Why? Because God was about to use this man. Cyrus the Great rose from a small kingdom to build the largest empire of the ancient world had ever seen. Stretching from the borders of India in the east to the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west.
The time for conflict
He was a
has ended.
military genius, a political
Let peace be the
strategist,
foundation
and something
upon
almost
which we
unheard
build
of, a
our future.
conqueror who believed in mercy. In 539 BC, Cyrus marched his armies toward Babylon, the most fortified city in the ancient world, surrounded by walls so thick that chariots could race along their tops, watered by the Euphrates River.
To the king.
Babylon was considered unconquerable. The night Cyrus attacked, the Babylonian king was hosting a feast, drinking wine from the
the
sacred
idols of
vessels
gold
stolen
and
from
silver.
Jerusalem's temple, mocking the God of
idols that
Israel.
see not nor hear.
That same night, a hand appeared and wrote on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parson. Numbered, weighed, divided. Before dawn, Babylon had fallen. The greatest empire of the ancient world fell in a single night. Cyrus's engineers had diverted the Euphrates, the gates were open, the guards were drunk.
People of Babylon.
And when Cyrus
Rise.
entered
You
Babylon,
are free.
he did something that shocked the entire ancient
true?
world. He freed the
Free?
captives. Every nation, every people that
Go.
Babylon had enslaved,
Find your
Cyrus sent them home.
The temple
But for
awaits.
Israel,
Thus says Cyrus, king
his
of Persia.
decree was specific,
The Lord God of heaven has
personal,
given me
and
all the kingdoms
staggering.
of the earth.
The Lord,
And he has
the
charged
God
me
of
to build him
heaven,
a house in
has
Jerusalem.
given me all the kingdoms. Not only did Cyrus free the Jewish exiles, he returned the sacred vessels stolen from Jerusalem's temple.
Keep moving.
He funded the
sun rises on the
rebuilding of
path to
Jerusalem and sent the
We
people
shall not
home with
falter.
silver, gold,
Our
and
journey
royal
home
protection.
begins. The The 70 years are
The
ended.
exile was over.
Look at the light.
70
We're
years
almost home.
exactly as the prophet
Keep
Jeremiah
moving.
had
Keep
predicted,
your
and
eyes
then
on
the
the
door
horizon.
opened. Not through a Jewish military victory, not through political negotiation, but through a Persian king who worshipped different gods and yet fulfilled, point by point, a prophecy written before his grandfather was born. We spend so much time looking for God in the expected places, in the temples, in the priests.
You shall return.
But Cyrus reminds us that God is not limited by our
Your
categories.
journey is over.
He will use a pagan king to free his people. He will call a man by name 150 years before he is born. As a records God saying, I will go before you and level the mountains. I have called you by name. Though you do not know me. Those 5 words should stop us cold. The purposes of God are not dependent on the awareness of the people he works through. The Persian Empire, the civilization that would one day become Iran, was, in its finest tower,
You are free.
the
Thank
instrument
you,
of
thank
God's
you, thank
mercy
you.
toward his people. That is
Praise
the
be
world
God.
we have lost.
Once the finest hour
And
of
understanding
Persia,
how
this
Persia
civilization
went
now
from
stands
God's
as
instrument to Israel's most dedicated
A
enemy
dramatic reversal indeed.
is the story we are about to tell. Drop a fire emoji if this changed the way you see history.
After
The
all these
exiles
years,
came home.
we are
They
finally
rebuilt
home.
the walls of Jerusalem and reconstructed the
begins
temple.
now.
Smaller than Solomon's, humbler, quieter, but standing again on the same hill where it had stood before. And for a moment, it seemed like the story had found its happy ending. It had not. Because the ancient world does not stand still. Empires rise and fall like tides. And the tiny nation of Israel sat directly in the path of every wave. The Persian Empire that had freed and lasted 2 more centuries before it met. A young Macedonian king who moved faster and hit harder than anyone before him. His name was Alexander. In 334 BC, he swept out of Greece and tore through Persia. Like a fire through dry grass, conquering everything from Greece to Egypt to India. Including, along the way, the land of Israel. Alexander entered Jerusalem without a battle.
You are the one foretold.
According to ancient accounts,
speaks of
he
me.
was shown the prophecies of
Centuries
Daniel
before my
writings
birth.
that described a Greek conqueror defeating Persia,
We did
and he
not
was so
expect
moved
such
that he
humility.
offered sacrifices at the
I am
temple.
humbled before your God.
But Alexander died young, 32 years old, in Babylon, and his empire fractured
The ancient land of Israel.
into the hands of
With the
his
shifting
generals,
tone of each
and
empire,
Israel was
the land
passed
remained
between
unchanged,
empires for a
testament
century.
to its enduring spirit.
I am he, God
And then
made
came the moment
manifest.
that pushed Israel
Defiance
too
now is
far.
defiance of the
A
divine
Seleucid
itself.
king named
Bow before
Antiochus,
me, or be broken.
a man so consumed by his own ego that he named himself God made manifest,
Open them!
marched into Jerusalem in 167 BC, desecrated the temple,
Move the idol
erected
in.
a statue of
Quickly.
Zeus
Make sure it is completely
inside its walls,
destroyed.
and sacrificed a
Commander.
pig on the holy altar
Altar is
for the
defiled.
Jewish people.
The
This
line
was
is
not
crossed.
merely a political
They have
outrage.
declared war
This was a
against the
declaration
God
of
the
war
universe.
against the God of the universe.
We strike when the moon
What
is
followed was
darkest.
one of the most remarkable military uprisings in history, the Maccabees.
For the Lord and the
A
covenant.
family of priests led a guerrilla revolt against the most powerful military in the region,
God of Abraham, look upon your
and,
temple.
against every
It is
conceivable
ours, Judah.
odds,
Look.
drove them out. The temple was
have done the
reclaimed,
impossible.
cleansed, and rededicated. This is the event still celebrated today as Hanukkah, the festival of lights, the miracle of the oil. The moment a small flame refused to go out when everything said it should. But the freedom did not last. In 63 BC, a Roman general named Pompey
Open it!
marched into Jerusalem and walked straight into the temple, pushing open the door to the Holy of
Yes,
Holies,
Commander.
the most sacred space in all of Judaism, where only the high priest could enter once a year. And he looked inside.
No.
The Roman
No
historians
statues. There's
record
nothing
his
here.
reaction with
This-
something close to
This cannot
confusion.
be.
He expected gold statues, divine images, the treasures of a god. Instead, he found an empty room. No idol, no image, nothing. Just space sacred, silent, utterly unlike anything
The time
Rome
for
had ever
deliberation is
encountered.
over.
Pompey
We
walked
stand
out,
here now,
touched nothing,
forever.
and left. But Rome did not leave.
Hail Rome! Rome's shadow
For the
falls
next
long
century,
upon these
Israel
streets.
lived under
Yet
Roman
the dawn
occupation,
still rises
sometimes
over the
tolerated,
mountains.
sometimes
The mountains, 2
brutalized.
denarii, Roman.
Always
Acceptable.
watched, always
Emperor
taxed,
Julius? Yes,
always
sir.
reminded that
Recorded.
Rome had no interest in the promises of their God. And it was into this world occupied, restless, longing that Jesus of Nazareth was born.
Where is he? Is it him?
They were
We need
looking
a
for a
sign.
Cyrus.
Look,
They got
on the
something
horizon.
far greater,
Deliver
and
us,
most of them
Cyrus,
did
as you
not
delivered our
recognize it.
fathers. Blessed
The
is he
crowds who
comes
cheered
in
him
the
on
name
Sunday
of the
called for his
Lord.
crucifixion by Friday.
We want Barabbas!
Rome executed him on a cross outside the city walls. And then, 3 days later, the tomb was empty. The movement that erupted from that empty tomb spread faster than any army, any empire, any ideology in human history. Within 3 centuries, it had transformed Rome itself. But for Jerusalem, for the Lamb, the story was about to reach its darkest chapter yet.
For Jerusalem!
In 66 AD, the Jewish people rose up against Rome in open revolt.
To me! Fight!
A desperate, courageous, ultimately catastrophic decision. The Emperor Nero sent his best general to
The
crush
mission
it.
rests
That
upon your
general was
shoulders.
called back to Rome
Crush
to become
Jerusalem.
emperor, and
I
handed
accept
command
the
to his
command.
son,
For Rome.
a young general named Titus. In 70 AD, Titus surrounded Jerusalem with 4 Roman legions.
The walls hold.
What followed
But
over
our
the next
strength
5
wanes.
months is almost too terrible to
We must
describe.
preserve these scriptures, your majesty.
The city ran out of food. People ate leather, then grass, then things no human being should ever eat.
The walls are broken!
Families were torn apart. And when the walls finally broke, the Romans poured in and showed no mercy.
God's judgment has
Josephus estimated that over a million people died.
Move, you dogs!
Nearly
Keep the
100,000
pace!
survivors
We are
were
undone.
taken as slaves. And the temple rebuilt after Cyrus freed the exiles, standing for over 500 years,
To the city.
was burned to the
temple
ground.
falls.
The Arch of Titus in Rome shows soldiers
Carry the
carrying
menorah
away the
high.
temple's menorah. The light of Israel carried into exile. Jerusalem was renamed. The land was renamed Palestina, specifically to erase the Jewish connection to the land, and the Jewish people scattered to every corner of the earth, carrying their Torah scrolls, their prayers, their memories, and one unshakable conviction.
Next
year in Jerusalem,
in Jerusalem.
they set it for nearly 2,000 years. The prophets had seen it coming. Jesus himself looked out over Jerusalem and wept
Not one
and
stone shall
said,
be left
"Not
upon
one
another.
stone here will be left on another. Every one will be
Not
thrown
one stone
down."
left upon another. I have seen the
Word
path
for
ahead.
word,
The return
fulfilled
is
in
assured.
70 AD. But the same
deserts
prophets
will
who
bloom
predicted
again.
exile also predicted the return. Ezekiel saw a valley of dry bones, scattered, bleached, lifeless. And God breathed, and the bones came together, and flesh covered them, and they stood up.
To enter into you.
These bones are the whole house of Israel. God said, "I will bring you back to your own land." 2,000 years later, that prophecy was still waiting, but it was coming. For 600 years after the fall of Jerusalem, the world reorganized itself
The world is
around
changing.
new powers,
They
new
say the gods
ideas,
are
new
displeased.
gods.
No.
Rome
New
converted
light
to
is
Christianity.
Can you feel it?
The fire burns
The Persian
eternal
Empire
as
rose
our
again under the
dynasty rises.
Sassanid dynasty in New
Guard the
Persia,
gates.
proud and
Do
powerful,
not let them pass.
but no longer the Persia of Cyrus. The Sassanids worshipped Zoroaster, not the God of Abraham.
Rome!
They fought Rome for centuries in a grinding, exhausting war that bled both empires dry, and left the ancient world gasping for something new. Something new was coming. In 610 AD, in a cave outside Mecca, a merchant named Muhammad reported receiving a revelation.
I speak of a path
What
to peace
began
and
as a
righteousness.
personal spiritual
We
experience
believe you!
became, within a
Join
single
me,
generation,
Let us bring light to this world.
the fastest growing religious and military movement the world had ever seen. By 636 AD, just 4 years after Muhammad's death, Arab armies had defeated the Persian Empire, the empire of Cyrus, that had once freed God's people, standing for over 1,000 years, collapsed in a single afternoon of battle. Persia did not just lose a war. Persia lost its identity. The old Persian religion, language, gods all swept aside and replaced. The Persian people converted, some willingly, some under pressure, and the land that had once produced Cyrus became one of the heartlands of the Islamic world. This is the great reversal. Not a sudden explosion of hatred, not a declaration of war made in a single day, but a slow, tectonic shift, the gradual replacement of one identity with another, until the civilization that God had once used to bless Israel had become ideologically its mirror opposite. In 638 AD, just 2 years after Persia fell, Arab Muslim armies entered Jerusalem. And here is something most Western history classes never teach: Jerusalem matters deeply to Islam. Not just to Judaism and Christianity. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered the third holiest site in all of Islam. 3 faiths, 1 hill, 1 city, and every generation convinced that God gave it to them. For the next 4 centuries, Jerusalem changed hands with the rhythm of a contested inheritance.
God wills it.
And then,
Take the cross
in
and deliver your
1095,
brethren.
Pope
For Christ's
Urban
sake,
II
arise
stood
and go
before a crowd in Clermont, France, and gave a speech that would launch 2 centuries of religious warfare. God wills it. The Crusades had begun. European Christian armies marched across a continent and a sea to reclaim the Holy Land.
God wills it.
And what they did when they
Forward to the
arrived
city.
remains one of the most morally
For Jerusalem.
complicated chapters in Christian history. In 1099, the Crusaders took Jerusalem. The accounts of what followed are difficult to read.
I say this
not to condemn an entire movement, but because honesty requires us to acknowledge
what happened.
that people have done terrible things in the name of the God of this land. And those terrible things have consequences that echo for centuries. The Crusades ended in failure. By 1291, the last Crusaders' stronghold had fallen. Jerusalem passed to the Mamluks, then to the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire would control the land of Israel for the next 400 years. Under the Ottomans, Jews were allowed to live in the land, tolerated, taxed, marginalized, but present. There was always a Jewish presence in the land, even through the darkest centuries of exile.
That matters because one of
That
the
matters
arguments made against
because
the modern
one of
state
the
of
arguments
Israel
made
needs
against
to
the
be
modern
confronted
state
with
of
historical
Israel.
honesty.
The land of
That
Israel.
the Jews simply arrived in 1948 and displaced a population ignores 4,000 years of continuous, documented presence. They were never entirely gone. They were never entirely silent. And through all of it, the Crusades, the Ottomans, the exile, Persia was transforming. The Safavid dynasty rose to power in Iran in 1501 and made a decision that would define Iranian identity for the next 5 centuries. They declared Shia Islam the official state religion. This was not merely a theological choice. It was a political and cultural identity marker. A way of distinguishing Persian civilization from the Sunni Arab world that had conquered them.
For 4,000 years,
Persia, now increasingly called Iran, from the ancient word Aryan, was reclaiming its identity. But the identity it reclaimed was no longer the one that had produced Cyrus.
The whispers of the desert
What I want
echo
you to see
truths
here is
hidden
how
beneath the
identity
sands of
shifts
time.
over centuries.
I invite you to see the real history. You are free to return.
How a
Go now to your
civilization
land.
once used
We are
as
free.
God's instrument of
Thank you,
mercy
my Lord.
toward
Thank you.
Israel
God's mercy will be shown
became,
to those who seek
layer
His
by
truth.
layer, century by century, something fundamentally opposed to Israel's
Keep
existence.
your ranks.
It was
Onward.
not hatred that drove this change at first.
What is happening
It was
to us?
conquest, conversion, and the slow replacement of memory. The Persian people did not wake up one morning and decide to become Israel's enemy. They were swept into a new story. And over centuries, that new story defined who they were at its deepest level. This is a conflict between two stories about who God is, what God promised, and who God chose. And both sides believe, with absolute conviction, they are on the right side.
If this
history is reshaping the way you see the Middle East, the like button is your amen.
Is your amen.
By the early 20th century, the land of Israel had been under Ottoman control. For 400 years, it was, by most accounts, a land in decline. Sparsely populated, largely neglected, its ancient terraces eroded, its forests stripped.
The time has come.
And yet, all across Europe,
must speak
a quiet
now.
movement was growing,
just
Jews
whisper,
asking a
but
question.
ask.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Their ancestors had asked at every Passover but never seriously acted upon.
May it be soon.
For generations we have
What if we
yearned.
actually went
But
back?
what if we
The
actually went
movement
back?
had a name, Zionism.
It's in the text right here.
I must
Its
organize the
founder was a
delegates from
secular
both
Austrian
sides.
journalist named
This
Theodor
time,
Herzl, a man
we will not
largely
fail.
assimilated into European culture, until the day he covered the trial of Alfred Dreyfus in Paris, a decorated officer.
You are stripped of your rank
Stripped of his rank and publicly humiliated for no reason other than being Jewish. Herzl sat in that courtroom and heard the crowd outside chanting, "Death to the Jews." In France, in 1894, in one of the most civilized nations on earth.
I understand
And he
now.
understood, with sudden
There is
and
no
terrible
country in the
clarity, that there was
where
no
we would be
country
safe.
where Jewish people would ever be truly safe as long as they had no country of their own.
I demand recognition
He
of this
wrote a
urgent need.
pamphlet.
Your
He
proposal
held a
is
congress.
unrealistic and
He
ill-timed.
spent the rest
The
of
hour
his
is late.
short life
We have so little time left. We need this. Not
trying
as a
to
privilege,
convince
but
the
as a
world
right.
that the Jewish people
Our
needed
right
and
to
deserved
live
a
and
homeland.
to be free here.
I have given all.
He died at 44. He did not live to see it,
State is yet
but the
to
seed
come.
he planted took root in soil that had been waiting for 2,000 years.
The Western Front.
The
a
First
landscape of
World War
unprecedented
shattered the
destruction.
Ottoman
December
Empire.
1917,
Britain took control
General
of the
Allenby's
land.
forces enter the Holy City.
The British Mandate.
They called
A new
Palestine
era
under a
begins in
League of
Jerusalem.
Nations mandate.
The Balfour
And in
Declaration
1917,
looms. History awaits.
Arthur Balfour wrote a letter, one paragraph, 67 words that would change the map of the world.
The British government views
The
with favor
Balfour
the
Declaration
establishment in
stated
Palestine
that
of a
Britain
national
viewed with
home.
favor the establishment of a
Yes,
national
national
home for the Jewish people in Palestine. 67 words, decades of conflict. Jewish immigration to the land accelerated. Arab opposition grew. Britain found itself caught between two promises it could not simultaneously keep, and then came the darkness that made everything else pale by comparison. Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazi regime systematically murdered 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, 2/3 of the entire Jewish population of Europe. 6 million. I want you to stop and hold that number for a moment. Not as a statistic, as people, mothers, fathers, children who never got to grow up, rabbis, teachers, musicians, farmers, families with names and faces and stories that were erased from the earth. In an act of industrial evil so vast the human mind still struggles to contain it. The Holocaust did not create the case for a Jewish homeland. That case had been made for centuries.
The time has
But it
come to
removed
vote.
every remaining argument against urgency. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jewish leadership accepted. The
And
Arab
now,
states
with the weight of
rejected
centuries
it.
upon
On May
us,
14,
we solemnly proclaim
1948,
the
David
establishment
Ben
of our
Gurion
sovereign
stood in
nation.
Tel Aviv and read the Israeli Declaration of Independence. 11 minutes later, the United States recognized the new state. The next morning, 5 Arab armies invaded Egypt from the south, Jordan from the east, Syria from the north, Iraq and Lebanon joining the assault. The new state of Israel,
The time has
with
come.
no air force, no heavy artillery, a population of 600,000,
For our land. Keep firing.
surrounded on every side by enemies who had sworn to destroy it, fought for its life.
Incoming from the south. It's up.
And it survived. Not
We made
comfortably,
it.
not without enormous loss, but it survived.
At what cost?
And here is where I have to bring you back to the prophet Ezekiel,
Ezekiel foresaw the rebirth. His vision of the dry bones.
because what happened in 1948 is either the most extraordinary political coincidence in human history, or it is exactly what Ezekiel described when he saw those dry bones rise.
And you shall know that I am the Lord.
Next year in
2,000
Jerusalem.
years of exile,
Next year in
2,000
Jerusalem.
years of saying next year in Jerusalem. 2,000 years of carrying the memory of a land in the hearts of a scattered people.
The decision
And
has been
then,
made.
in a single generation, the
Hear now the
Holocaust,
declaration
the
of a new
UN
age.
vote, the declaration,
We enter a
the
dawn.
survival. A nation was reborn, not slowly, not gradually, in a moment, on a specific date. Isaiah had written, 27 centuries
ever
earlier,
heard of
who has
such
ever heard of such things?
Can a
Can a country be born in a day? Can a nation be brought forth in a moment? May 14th, 1948. A country born in a day. I am not telling you what to conclude.
The people who
I
wrote
am
the
telling you
ancient
that the
text
people
having
who wrote
absolutely
these
no
words
access
did
to
not
a
have
newspaper
access
from 1948. They had something else entirely. Whatever you
to a
believe about
newspaper from
prophecy or God or
1948.
Scripture,
They had something
this
else.
next fact
And whatever
stands
you believe
entirely on
about
its own.
prophecy, the fact that a people dispersed for 2,000 years returned to the same land, speaking the revived version of the same language, and re-established a nation in the same location, is without precedent in all of human history. No other people have ever done this.
Not the Babylonians.
Not the Babylonians.
Not the Romans.
Not the Romans.
Persians. Not the Greeks.
Not the Persians.
Only Israel
not the
has
Greeks.
returned to their ancient
Only
land.
Israel. But the rebirth of Israel did not bring peace. It brought something it had always brought. A confrontation with the question that has never gone away: whose land is this? And in 1948, a new answer was forming in the mountains of Iran. An answer that would not fully emerge for another 30 years, but when it did, it would reshape the entire modern world. The next chapter is the one that explains today.
That reshaped the world.
In 1948, this same year Israel declared independence, a young Iranian student was studying in Egypt, reading, thinking, and growing increasingly convinced that the Western world was destroying the soul of the Muslim East. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini, and the revolution he would eventually lead would not just change Iran, it would change the entire architecture of the modern Middle East.
Together,
but before
we
Khomeini,
built a
there
new
was the
era
Shah,
of prosperity,
Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah
and
of Iran.
partnership for Iran.
The Shah delivered
Was everything the West wanted in a Middle Eastern leader: pro-American, pro-modernization, pro-Israel. In the 1960s and 70s, Iran and Israel had a remarkable relationship, quiet, unofficial, but deep. Israeli agricultural experts helped Iranian farmers. Iranian oil flowed to Israeli refineries. The two nations cooperated on intelligence, on military training, on the shared conviction that Arab nationalism was a greater threat to both of them than to anyone else.
The foundation of a quiet partnership.
It seems almost impossible to imagine now, but the Shah's modernization came with a price. His secret police, the Savak, were feared and brutal. His westernization felt.
Don't draw attention.
To millions of deeply religious Iranians, like an assault on everything sacred.
The music is great.
The mosques became the only space where opposition could breathe, and in the mosques,
freedom, the revolution begins now.
A revolution was being prepared. In January 1979, the Shah fled Iran. In February, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in Paris and stepped off a plane in Tehran. To a crowd of millions, the Islamic Republic of Iran was born. And within months, everything changed. The new government cut all ties with Israel. Khomeini declared Israel an illegitimate state. A cancer, in his words, that had to be removed from the body of the Islamic world. But Khomeini was not content with declarations. He built a strategy, unable to confront Israel directly, separated by geography, constrained by military reality. Iran began building the axis of resistance, a network of proxy forces positioned around Israel's borders, armed, funded, and directed by Tehran. Hezbollah in Lebanon, created by Iran in 1982, trained by Iranian Revolutionary Guards,
40 years
built into the most heavily armed non-state military force in the world.
Many national armies.
Hamas in Gaza, funded and equipped by Iran. The Houthis in Yemen, armed by Iran, firing missiles toward Israeli territory and disrupting global shipping lanes. Militias in Iraq, forces in Syria, a ring of proxies, tightening slowly around a country the size of New Jersey.
This is the Iran strategy.
Not a direct military confrontation, but a slow, patient, multi-front pressure campaign designed to exhaust Israel economically, psychologically, and militarily over decades, and behind all of it the nuclear program. Iran has been pursuing nuclear capability for over 3 decades. Multiple rounds of international sanctions, multiple rounds of negotiations. The 2015 nuclear deal, which Iran signed, then watched the United States withdraw from in 2018, then began violating systematically. As of today, Iran is assessed to be within weeks, some analysts say days, of having enough enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon. The implications for Israel are
For
existential.
40 years, we have declared
A
that
nation
Israel
whose
holds no
leadership has
legitimacy.
repeatedly called for
This is not
Israel's
just
elimination,
politics, it is our
that has
sacred
spent
principle.
40 years building proxy forces around Israel's borders, that has fired ballistic missiles directly at Israeli territory. That nation, with the nuclear weapon, represents a threat unlike anything Israel has faced since 1948, and Israel has made clear, repeatedly and credibly, that it will not allow that to happen. This is the razor's edge the world is standing on right now. The book of Ezekiel, the same prophet who described the dry bones, contains another vision.
He saw the world.
A vision of a great coalition that will one day descend on a restored Israel. From multiple directions simultaneously, the coalition includes powers to the north, to the east, and specifically a nation called Persia, the only nation in the entire prophecy identified by its modern name. Persia, Iran, listed by name in a 2,600-year-old text as part of a coalition that will one day move against Israel. I am not telling you this is tomorrow's headline. Prophecy is not a newspaper, and anyone who tells you they know exactly when and how these things will unfold is telling you more than the text says.
What I am telling you is this.
What I am telling you is this: the conflict between Israel and Iran is not a modern political accident. It is the latest chapter in a story that began when God made a promise to a wandering shepherd in the desert. A story that has survived every empire that tried to end it, every exile that tried to erase it, every weapon that tried to destroy it.
The Jordan River to the east,
And the land, that narrow strip
Mediterranean to
between the
west.
river and the sea, is still standing.
The narrow strip of land between them.
At the center of it all, just as it always has been. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust, killing over 1,200 men, women, and children, taking more than 200 hostages, and triggering a war that is still unfolding as you watch this. Iran celebrated. Its proxies mobilized, the rain tightened, and the world watched, as it has always watched,
I am not sure that this applies
unsure
to this
of what to
particular
do with a
issue. It's
conflict whose
unprecedented,
roots
but not
go
with
deeper
purpose.
than any diplomat's
Nothing in the
memory.
framework works.
And the land is still there. The promise is still there. The conflict is still there. And the God who started this story has not left the room.
I do not know.
I do not know how this ends, but I know who holds the ending.
The vastness of the
And
world,
that in a world that
spinning
feels
slowly
like
in
it
the
is
golden
spinning out
light,
of control,
multiple regions of conflict and tension, visible as
Welcome, friend. If you have found
is the
value
only
here,
ground
if this
worth
has helped you
standing
see
on.
deeper,
If
then
this
this
channel
ground is
has
worth
given you
standing
a
on.
deeper way to
Join
see the
us.
world, not just the headlines, but the story behind the headlines, then subscribe.
look again at the desert.
We have
the
traveled
beginning of our
4,000 years together,
4,000
from a promise
years of
made in the
history lies
desert
before us.
through a wandering shepherd, through slavery and exodus, through conquest and exile. Through the miracle of Cyrus, a pagan king called by name to free a people he had never met. Through the flames of Jerusalem, the silence of 2,000 years, the darkness of the Holocaust, and the impossible morning of May 14, 1948. And here we are, standing at a moment in history where every thread we have followed is pulled tight, tighter than it has ever been. The land is still there. The promise is still there. The conflict is still there. And the God who started this story has not left the room.
I want to leave you with one thought.
I want to leave you with one thought. In every generation, there have been people
where they came from,
who looked at Israel scattered, persecuted, exiled, surrounded, and concluded the story was over. The Pharaoh thought it was over. Nebuchadnezzar thought it was over. Antiochus thought it was over. Titus thought it was over. Hitler thought it was over. They were all wrong.
The empires they built are gone.
Every single empire that set itself against this people and this land is now a museum exhibit. And the people they tried to erase are still here, still praying, still building.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Still saying next year in Jerusalem. That is not politics. That is not coincidence.
I pray this journey has shown you that just
that
as
is a story with an author. And if this video has done anything,
come, walk with him.
If it has given you one new lens through which to see the headlines,
in a world consumed by conflict,
that frighten you, the conflicts that confuse you, the world that feels like it is unraveling,
share this with those.
Then share it. Share it with someone who is asking questions but cannot find answers.
Breaking news, conflict escalates.
Share it with someone who watches the news and feels only
Analysts fear
despair.
a humanitarian crisis is imminent.
Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the chaos of history
I have given you all I have.
Has never been the final word. Like this video,
Now it is up
subscribe
to you.
if you want to
You
go
wanna
deeper.
The atmosphere of
The land was chosen. The people were chosen. And the story, no matter how many times it looked like it was ending, was never, ever over. And neither are we.